All right, so I am streaming, so I suppose I should start talking. You're probably listening to the beautiful music. That is Chopin. Okay. I kind of like listening to this kind of stuff while I'm talking. All right, so I'm going to get a window window share setup here. Display capture. Let's see. Oh, I think I need to use a screen capture. Let's see. So on this live stream, I feel like I tend to be a little bit more energetic when I do some of these live streams, like the 5 ways stuff. But this time, I'm going to kind of take it slow because we're going to talk about dream yoga and I have a lot to, thoughts. I like kind of like letting my thoughts, following my thoughts, letting them go. So, okay, so let me just get this situated on the screen here. Well, we can't have my avatar being blocked. Okay. All right, so that way you can kind of see, read along if you like. All right, so what I'm going to do is just kind of give a little bit of an intro to what Dream Yoga is. Then I'm going to share the resources that I've found that have been great. And then I'm going to go into more details about where Dream Yoga came from, what I've learned about it, what I've learned about Tibet and Tibetan religion. So I'm going to go ahead and get right into it. All right, so most people will know of Dream Yoga through this book, The Tibetan Yogas of Dream and Sleep. This was written by a guy named Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. So Rinpoche means precious one. So a Rinpoche is kind of like a teacher. It's a certain rank in Tibetan Buddhism, in a sense, and so Tenzin, he was born like right after the communist Chinese Cultural Revolution. A lot of Tibetans were killed. I believe it's in the millions. Their country was taken from them by the Chinese. Many of them were murdered. They basically decapitated the leadership of the country. Anybody in leadership or who had any money at all were killed. All of their stuff was stolen. So there was a massive exodus out of the country to the south, really anywhere, but mostly to the south and into Nepal. So Tenzin's parents were one of those people. And they set up the Tibetans set up schools in Nepal and India, and that is where Tenzin started. I believe he started in Menla. I might be getting that wrong. It's in his intro in the book. I think Menla is might be the big monastery there in Nepal. But he started there. He went to Italy, went to the U.S. He studied under a number of masters, a number of teachers, and he's been probably the most well known, at least, maybe the best teacher or transmitter of Tibetan dream yoga teachings to the West. Um, and if you're going to get this book, I would suggest getting the newer edition. So there was the older edition, which is this one, the or lighter tan cover, and then the photograph, the darker color. That is the newer edition. So the newer edition has a little bit more explanation in some of the later chapters. I think he did a good job of updating his the way he explains some things and gives you a little bit better idea on a few different practices. So I definitely recommend this book. Um, it's great. So, all right. So the reason why I kind of told a little story about the Tibetans is because that's where all these teachings came from. They came out like these teachings were secret and they were brought to the West in a way it was by force, not from the West but from the Chinese, and it was a way of preserving the teachings. And so it's really a privilege to be able um, to be able to see these teachings. It's because typically they'd be secret. Um, they're secret because for a number of reasons I can get into later, but essentially, dream yoga comes from a particular practice of an illusory body yoga, is what it's called. So there's something called the 6 yogas of Naropa. There are a number of formulations in terms of the yogas. They're over time in Tibet, they kind of condensed their teachings into several categories, and it's sort of also kind of ended up being a progression from one to the next. And one of the 6 yogas of Naropa is the illusory body yoga, and within that yoga, you have dream yoga. Also, I believe it's the Kalachakra Tantra, where dream yoga teachings are found. If I'm remembering that correctly, there's also some in some tantras, which are older Buddhist texts, and you'll find a number of sources for dream yoga practices. The practices that Tenzin teaches are Bon. So Tibetan Bon is the indigenous religion of Tibet, and the dream yoga teachings there originate in the Maju, which is the mother tantra of the Bon tradition, and it's claimed that that teaching was created through a lucid dream. And this is a common theme in Tibetan Buddhism, is lamas having lucid dreams in which they experience teachings and they bring those teachings to waking life. So mantras, um, ceremonies, rituals, all a variety of different practices have been discovered, you could say, in the lucid dream state. So dream yoga is one of those. I'm gonna. Music is getting excited. So dream yoga is one of those, and to say what it is, it's going to take a while, and I'm going to go through these books first before I really get into it. But if I was to break it down in sort of a Western way, which is to say, like, well, how does it work, and what do you have to do? it's a very Western way of looking at things. It's like, well, just get to the point and tell me what to do. So basically, what you're doing is a number of practices. And in the Tibet, this is why I do the Tibetan Yogas of Dream and Sleep first. There's a few other books as well, but that I would recommend and I will go into. But the reason why I say this is a great one because Tenzin does such a good job of laying out the structure. And I think the four foundational practices are probably the one of the best um, kind of general explanations of dream yoga. It goes into the working with karmic traces during the day, imagining things are a dream, which is Andrew Holacek refers to it as illusory form. So I think Holacek probably derived his term illusory form from the illusory body yoga, and he instead of saying illusory body, he used illusory form. That's kind of describes a practice. And um, so if you were to look into the Tibetan Yogas of Dream and Sleep, he starts the book with a lot of explanation, a lot of kind of foundational information about the tradition, about the perspectives and views, and a lot of it's just foundational information for the practices later on. So what you'd be visualizing, what you'd be doing during the day, during the night, as you go to sleep, as you wake up. Um, but uh, that's the real thing about Tibetan Dream Yoga is I hesitate to share with people these things because there is a way to extract the practices alone, just the practices. So, for example, there's like daytime practices, pre-sleep practices, nighttime practices, and awakening in the morning practices. So that's four different time periods: daytime, pre-sleep, nighttime, morning. So all the practices break down into those four time periods. And then you could say, well, illusory form is kind of like a reality check, and you can start making parallels between dream yoga and Western lucid dreaming practices. Okay, so illusory form is like a reality check. Your pre-sleep, um, your pre-sleep practices could be like incubation or visualization. Your nighttime practices could be wake back to bed and visualizations. Your morning could be one of the practices in the morning is recalling any non-lucid dreams and then imagining their lucid dreams for the next night, which is like mild. Um, and so they actually practice mild upon awakening, which is like nobody does that in the West, right? Anyway, you could make all these parallels to Western practices. You could extract the practices on their own out of the tradition. You could even take the practices and like surgically remove the Tibetan symbolism, iconography, and replace it with whatever you like, Western iconography and symbolism. The problem I have, and this is why I don't share it, because the problem I have with that is, you know, the body or the earth or nature, it's a whole. It's a holistic system, and it's not something that you can just pick apart. And it's not like a modular machine that you can just, okay, I'm going to take this piece out, put this other piece back in. But everything works together in a very balanced way. And this tradition has developed over time to be extremely complex, but also balanced. Um, and so all of the pieces that are involved have their place. They have a purpose, and they all work together. So if you're approaching dream yoga, I think it's great to get into it, and I'm going to go into like what I would suggest how somebody gets into it. But if you're just wanting to use dream yoga practices for lucid dreaming, what I would do is pick up this book. This is like number one, Tibetan Yogas of Dream and Sleep. But also Andrew Holacek has Holacek. He's got a couple books, and then let's see if I can do this without doxing myself. And then B. Allen Wallace also. So Andrew Holacek is a little bit more accessible. He's going to be probably the most Western tone of the Dream Yoga authors that I've read. He is a long time teacher. He's got a great podcast. I would definitely check out his podcast. I think it's called Edge of Mind, I believe, if I remember correctly. He's got a couple books. Let's see if I can pull those up. So, yeah, so Dream Yoga is the one that I've read. I've read it a couple times. Great book. It's extremely accessible. For me, I found it to be a little bit limiting compared to the other content that I had, just because I wanted to keep going deeper. But he does a good job of kind of, extracting those useful bits. Then Dreams of Light, the profound daytime practice of lucid dreaming. This is the illusory form, and this is great. This book is great. I think it's a great introduction into illusory form. And if you want a daytime practice that will kind of it's not just about lucid dreaming. This is more, people talk about lucid living, but this is really it. I mean, we're talking mindfulness on like another level. So mindfulness, yeah, you're mindful of your surroundings, but take it to the next level, you're actually being aware of the production of the projection of your mind. So everything that you're experiencing is a projection of your brain and your mind. And so you're becoming aware of that. It's almost like a Vipassana practice throughout the day. So great book. B. Allen Wallace's book, Dreaming Yourself Awake. He has a lot of books on Tibetan Buddhism, but Dreaming Yourself Awake is specifically the Dream Yoga book, and it's a little bit more. B. Allen Wallace tends to be a little bit more on the strict side of things. Like he's like, well, there's a definition for things, and that's what the definition is. I really appreciate that, because a lot of times people can get a little bit more, um, just lenient with definitions, or how things are grouped together, where things come from, what, and you tend to lose a lot of clarity. You tend to lose the ability to make clear connections between things. Things kind of turn into a soup. So I like his approach, because one of the big things I like is because he includes meditation teachings in his book. So he goes into shamatha. In Tenzin's book, the Tibetan Yoga's Dream of Sleep, he talks about the same thing. It's called Shine, Zhine, Shine, and it's same thing as shamatha. Shamatha. I was trying to pronounce it like Beyond Wallace pronounces it. And that's like the core practice of disciplining your mind, basically. So it's like, if you want to do a sport and you're trying to do like strength training, the shine or shamatha, that is your strength training. That's going to be just the basic skill of mental discipline, relaxation, focus, um, you know, and meditation is a huge subject. So leave it at that. So yeah, those are the kind of the three main books, probably most people know about, and the books that I would recommend. And then I also want to go into some other books that I've read, starting with this one. So This one is by Michael Katz, Tibetan Dream Yoga, the Royal Road to Enlightenment. Of course, you see Charlie Morley's book here, Dreams of Awakening. Charlie Morley, he did go to India. He did study under a lama for a time. He does know things. So I know he is on more of the spiritual side, more of the dream coach kind of person, but he does, I've flipped through that book, haven't read it completely, but he does have some helpful information there. I think it's worth a read, is what I'm saying. So Michael Katz, this book is interesting because he goes into some really deep areas of Tibetan Buddhism, uh, but presents it in a really understandable way. And he goes into concepts that he can understand a lot better than me because, he spent years and years translating Tibetan texts, studying under lamas. So it really helped me kind of speed up the process of understanding the Dream Yoga teachings because he really was able to translate that really effectively into kind of the Western mindset. Another one that I really like, Namkai Norbu. So this was actually a teacher of Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche's in Italy. And this book is less structured, but it's also extremely helpful. All of these books that I'm suggesting, I would definitely get. I feel like these are almost required reading if you're going to really get into Dream Yoga. Let's see. So the other one here, Rinpoche Gyattrul. I don't see a good. It looks like this is it. Okay, so there's the cover that I have right there. Meditation Transformation. This one is like if you translated a Tibetan text into English. It's extremely dense. It's extremely difficult to understand if you don't understand the terminology of Tibetan Buddhism. Um, it's not very accessible. However, if you do know the terminology, if you do have, if you've already read some of these other books, then it's going to be extremely insightful. It's going to blow your mind how insightful it is. But like I said, very high bar for entry. Then we have Essential Journey of Life and Death. And I don't have a cover here, so let's just go to the Amazon listing. And that's not what this is volume. Okay, this is volume 2. That's the one. So volume 2, this is part of a 2-volume book on kind of like it's really just basic teachings of Vajrayana Buddhism, which is Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana. And I'll get into the differences between Vajrayana and Bon in a minute. But so this says, using Dream Yoga and POA as the path. POA is a practice of, it essentially means exiting consciousness. It's a practice of removing your consciousness from your body. So think, in the West, we hear words like out of body experience or astral projection. It's not like that at all, but it is like that. It's removing your consciousness from your body, but the practice itself is in preparation for death. So in the West, out of body experience is like, oh, cool, I can go over here. Oh, yeah, I'm over here now. And astral projection is like, oh, I'm going into the spirit realm and seeing demons and angels and I'm talking to God and whatever. This, and Tibetan Buddhism in general, a lot of it is preparation for death. Sleeping is seen as an analogy, or it's kind of analogous to death. And so the ability to remain aware as you're falling asleep or in sleep is seen as extremely valuable in terms of being able to experience death in a healthy way, that you'll be able to stay awake during your death and have a healthy transition. So in this book, I like this book because it has some practices that I don't find in other books. And it's got some really interesting and complex exercises. And it also has a progression kind of format where it's like, if you're a beginner, you do this, this, and this. If you're intermediate, the interesting thing about this one is that it doesn't really make a lot of sense from a Western perspective, the way we teach lucid dreaming. Like, for example, when it teaches control, it talks about um, one of the first things that you do is um, try to see from another being's perspective in the dream. Um, Another thing is producing an object, then producing 20 of that object, then 100 of that object, then 1,000 of that object. And they are, the interesting thing for me about this is they're creating schemas. These schemas are tools that they're using in the lucid dream toward a specific end. And that end is to dissolve the lucid dream and retain your awareness in total dissolution, and retaining your awareness in dreamless sleep. That's the end point for uh, not necessarily the end point, but the idea for a lot of these practices is to move beyond lucid dreams. That's another reason why I hesitate to share these things with people, because they're thinking, oh, the Tibetans, they lucid dream too, and they know how to, I can learn what they learn. But their purpose and their goal, their aim, completely different from most people in the West. Most people in the West want wish fulfillment. They want um, fantasy experiences. They want to go into another world every night. All of those things are totally fine, in my opinion. It's totally acceptable. Um, the thing is that it's kind of at odds with the Tibetan Dream Yoga teachings, which is to say that they are completely, entirely focused on using every aspect of the lucid dream in service of dissolving it. So the whole idea is to learn all aspects of the lucid dream so that you can master it and go beyond it. And then when you get to that part, which is sleep yoga, and Tibetan yogas of dream and sleep goes into that, you go beyond that. So you're just, um, it's a progression, one after the other. All right. So that goes into kind of what dream yoga is, the books that I would definitely recommend. There's a lot of other books out there, and these are just the ones that I've read. I really enjoy them. I think they're really helpful. All right. So I want to kind of give a little bit more context in case people are curious, if you want to know more. What happened with me was I got into the lucid dreaming side of it, and then I got into more of the spiritual practices side of it. So while I may have started out just doing the lucid dreaming stuff, then I got into the Bon tradition, which is Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche's tradition. I did study Vajrayana, which is Tibetan Buddhism. I studied that quite a bit, but I found that Tibetan Bon was more attractive to me. Um, I think probably the biggest reason was because of Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. His example, the way he teaches, um, was great. And I just felt like it just feels like the Bon tradition is more in touch with the earth. It does come out of shamanism. It just, you know, Tenzin is a householder. He has a family. whereas most Vajrayana lamas are not householders. So I just feel like, I don't know, I get the impression that Tenzin's more grounded, maybe because of being a householder. I don't know. I know in the Bon tradition, dream yoga, making dream yoga as the center of the practice, um, seems to be more common, at least according to something that Tenzin says in, I believe it's in the Tibetan Yogas of Dream and Sleep. He talks about how a number of Bon lamas use dream yoga as the center of their practice. So um, lamas tend to select a particular uh, practice to center on over their life. I don't know. Maybe they'll switch it up, but um, dreams and lucid dreaming has always been my focus. So even if I'm learning about any religion or anything, I'm always going to gravitate towards something that resembles lucid dreaming. So I've studied a lot about mysticism and visionary experiences, and so on. So um, the origination of these practices, it depends on who you ask. According to the Bon tradition, they had these they had a form of these practices a long time ago. They claim their tradition is 13,000 or more years old, um, and that these practices were kind of baked into their tradition before Buddhism ever got to Tibet. So Buddhism got to Tibet. Um, let's just ask Google. When did Buddhism reach Tibet? Is it in the 600s? Yeah. Okay. So the 7th century, it very quickly dominated the country, um, because it was introduced to the country by Buddhist missionaries. So Buddhism is one of the few religions which actually evangelizes, and then it's said that one of the Tibetan kings decided to he was interested in Buddhism, decided to call a Buddhist master to Tibet, Padmasambhava, and he is now known in Tibet as Guru Rinpoche. He is the kind of original guru, and when he came in, he, practically speaking, with the help of the Tibetan king, converted Tibet to Buddhism. So that involved a lot of murdering Bon priests, shamans. Um, it involved Padmasambhava traveling the countryside, taming local nature gods, and recruiting them for the Buddhist cause. So, if you know about European history, this is going to sound familiar. Um, in the Catholic tradition, as the Romans and then later on other European powers took over the indigenous gods, and this happened in South America, Central America, the indigenous gods were then incorporated into Catholicism. So that's where Celtic Catholicism comes from. You have some really interesting Central South American Catholicism. So, similar thing happened in Tibet. So around 1500 years ago, Buddhism reaches Tibet. Now, there is some growing evidence that the Bon tradition, Dzogchen, was in existence before Buddhism reached Tibet. There's the veracity of the claims of oral traditions have been questioned, or again, there's arguments one way or the other how accurate it can be. The Bon tradition claims that it was originally started by a spiritual master that came out of Persia, modern day Afghanistan. Um, so that's interesting. It's entirely possible that some kind of tradition came from Persia into Tibet and mingled with the indigenous culture, which would have probably been shamanistic at the time. Shamanism, for whatever reason, tends to naturally develop in human um, indigenous cultures, and um, Bon is in Dzogchen in particular is a little bit more based on ideas and concepts rather than you know the earth, trees, water, elements, animals, that sort of thing. And that's you could crudely make this isn't a really good. Some people call it high magic, low magic. I don't like that. So it's like there's certain religions where it's like the rituals are like it's a lot of recitation of words, some mental concepts versus maybe a more shamanistic style, which is like working with the entrails of animals or um, you know you're working with physical things, and each physical thing has properties that have an effect. Um, so Bon is kind of a mixture of probably three different traditions. Probably a mixture of the indigenous tradition of Tibet, some Persian tradition, and the Indian Buddhist tradition. All right, so over time, Tibetan Buddhism has had, past tense, evolved into its own thing. And there, there was somebody named, so Naropa, before Naropa, there was somebody, I'm really, so it's Tsongkhapa, Naropa, and there was a teacher of Naropa. I'm spacing on the name. Um, but essentially there was a bunch of teachings in India, right? All these tantric tantras in India, and the teachings from India came into Tibet. So you can see here, Naropa lived in the 10th and 11th centuries. These yogas are a key component of Tibetan tradition, particularly in the Kagyu and Gelug schools. So there's multiple schools. The three main schools are Nyingma, Kagyu, and Gelug. Nyingma being the largest. Um, Six yogas are inner heat, Tumo. If you've ever heard of Wim Hof, he teaches a variation of inner heat. There's videos on YouTube of Tibetan monks using Tumo to um, raise their body heat to the point where they're putting on wet T-shirts in the mountains in dead of winter. It's extremely cold, and they're so hot that they're actually heating up the shirts to where they're steaming, and they dry the shirts out with their own body heat. So um, you can see Tumo, illusory body, clear light, dream yoga, intermediate state, conscious reverence. So um, let's see. So there's a bit more there. That response is not exactly accurate, but there's some more there. There's I think that's missing some. That's missing um, Mahamudra, Karma Mudra. It's missing Karma Mudra. It's missing Deity Yoga. Um, so big question is like, all right, so I've practiced Dream Yoga, but there's more to this. Um, or like you've practiced Dream Yoga and you would like to, or you've learned about it and you would like to learn more. You'd like to learn the context of it. You'd like to learn like surrounding support practices or perspectives. I think one of the best places to start would be the three doors. The three doors in Buddhism are mind, speech, body, body, speech, mind. Um, so these are associated with particular areas in the body. They're associated with particular deities for each tradition. Um, so they're associated with colors, sounds, symbols. That's going back to, this tradition is a holistic body of work. There are symbols, there are movements, there are colors, shapes, every aspect of our experience. They've made every single bit of their tradition correspond to every aspect of our experience. And over time, you start to realize that the information that you're learning, the experience that you're having, are continually being packaged within these symbols and sounds and colors. And so over time, it becomes second nature. You don't even have to think about it, to where you think of a particular color in with this intention, and bam, you're in the mind. You're in that mindset. Split second, it's just there. Um, so and it all strengthens itself. It's all interconnected and self-supporting. Um, so if you're going to learn about the three doors, I personally like Tenzin. I'm just going to go look up his books because it'll be helpful just to look at these. All right. So where is it? All right, here we go. Tibetan Yogas of Body, Speech, and Mind. So this book is extremely useful. If you're into mindfulness, if you're trying to do illusory form, this book will just completely, it's like a whole new world for your practice. Um, so the body is what you might think it is. Um, Using movement, you're using um, you know, sitting positions, meditation positions, what have you. Speech, that's words, symbols. Mind, the concept of mind is a little different than what we might think. The mind in Tibet is located at the heart, and that's a little bit more complex. So if you're trying to get a little bit more context and learning more, and you want something that's useful that you can apply, then the Tibetan Yogas of Body, Speech, and Mind are definitely recommended. I could go through these other books, but it's not really applicable to Dream Yoga. The other books are more applicable to the Tibetan Bon tradition and Dzogchen. The Wonders of the Natural Mind is more focused on Dzogchen. Awakening the Sacred Body, Awakening the Luminous Mind, those are more focused on like Bon practices. Tibetan sound healing, same thing. So depending on what you're looking at, you can dive more into those. Also, Tenzin has tons of content online on its Facebook, on YouTube. Look up Ligmincha International. There's a YouTube channel, there's a website, there's free lessons on the website. So if you go to the website and you go to practice Ligmincha learning, there are current courses, but there's also free courses down here. So there's courses on starting a meditation practice. There's, this true source of healing. That's more like going deeper into the religious, spiritual aspects of Bon. Probably the rest of these are as well, but the starting a meditation practice could be really helpful. All right, so I've talked about a little bit more. I talked about Buddhism. So yeah, so let me just finish up explaining Bon and Vajrayana. So initially when Buddhism came in, there was a series of persecutions of the Bon tradition where the Buddhists would go out and murder priests and burn their books. So um, the Bon practitioners hid their books and were able to preserve enough of their teachings over time. They preserved their core teachings, the Mother Tantra. Um, so that's why we still have the Bon tradition. Uh, I believe it was pretty recently in the last 10, 20 years that the Dalai Lama recognized the Bon school as a school of Buddhism. So that's great because they basically are like, I've practiced a little bit more in depth, and it's very similar to Vajrayana. It's actually more intense, very similar. It's also a little bit more open to, um, shall we say, uniqueness, I guess. They tend to have more householders. I know Vajrayana has opened up quite a bit in the West to women, but Vajrayana has had myriad problems with abuse, and that was one of the things that kind of turned me off to it. They have such a poor track record with gurus being abusive. Even recently with the Me Too movement, even more stuff coming out. So that's really problematic for me. Um, so I'd rather learn from somebody who is very open, who actively utilizes their platform to platform women, to be open to different viewpoints. Um, everybody has a viewpoint, including Tenzin Wangyal. You know, is very much an advocate for the Bon religion. Um, doesn't have a great view of Western religions, although I think that's partly because Americans have become so uh, cynical about Western religion. Um, most people know pretty much nothing about Western religion, Christianity and Judaism, but they're more than happy to um, treat it like it's meaningless and useless, even while knowing pretty much nothing about it. I don't think that's what Tenzin is, but I think he's probably encountered a lot of people like that because a lot of people that gravitate towards Buddhism, you know, they'll probably have exposure to Western religion, maybe even have a Christian upbringing. So, like I said, everybody has a perspective. Um, so yeah, all right. So that's pretty much it. I think my experience. I didn't really go into my experience with it. I have some episodes of my experience with illusory form on the channel. I have continued to practice, not as consistent as I would like, but I will be releasing more episodes of the Rainbow Road in the future. Um, it's just that as I got deeper into the practice, I realized that it's becoming more and more inaccessible to other people, and it's also the level I'm getting to is more dangerous for me, and maybe not dangerous for me in as much as it is for other people. If I were to explain these practices and tell people to do them, there is a possibility that they could have some pretty serious issues. People even have issues with practicing Vipassana, a basic meditation. So, going deeper into any kind of insight practice or deity yoga practice is going to be, it should not be taken lightly, is the way I should say it. It's going, this Tibetan Buddhism is called Vajrayana, and Vajrayana is the lightning path. And it took me a while to realize why it's called that. And essentially, what Vajrayana and Tibetan Buddhism, Tibetan Bon, what it does is it obliterates your identity. So it 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 makes you completely aware of how your identity is constructed, and that there is something underneath it. The identity is not absolute reality. It is something that is produced. I don't want to call it a construct because I don't like that how overused that term has become, how misused it has become. But it's definitely been produced. Your identity has been produced. So once you actually get underneath it, there is a potential for becoming unmoored. You need an identity. Okay. Now, of course, you can go too far and be like, well, yeah, my identity is the right one, you know, and anybody who doesn't have mine um, is, whatever, a bad person. Uh, but yeah, so when you start working on these kind of things, there's a potential for some serious changes in your life, um, some serious mental changes. So whatever you do, take it slow. You know, I don't think you can go wrong by following Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche's advice in his book. I think it's a great book. Just take it slow. Take your time. And of course, you can always ask me about it in the Discord. There is an invite link below in the video description. If you're not on Discord, feel free to join. You can join on browser or on the app. All right. Well, I don't want to go too much further into it. Just wanted to kind of give an overview, and I hope you all enjoyed. Leave a comment. I will respond if you do.